Hi. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. My name's John Sewell. I'm coming to you from my basement during quarantine. I was invited to give this class for Horizon Lodge, Ordo Templi Orientis in Seattle, Washington. And of course, coronavirus has made it impossible for us to meet at the lodge, so I'm using this format instead. Horizon Lodge, as I said, is a chartered body of Ordo Templi Orientis, which is a 501c3 nonprofit religious organization. If you can, and you're interested, I'll just say here at the beginning, and I'll probably say again at the end, if you like this sort of material, if you want to support this kind of educational process, definitely support Horizon. There should be links kicking some dough that helps pay for our space, keeps the lights on, pays the bills during a time like this when, again, we're providing as much content as we can at a distance. It allows us to maintain our community integrity until such time as we can come back together as a community. This specific class is initiation for non-initiates, and basically that's what the whole class is about. This class is specifically for non-initiates. Initiates are welcome to, enjoy the class. In the comments section, and we'll talk about this a little more in a minute, please feel free to offer your insights, but let me say at the beginning, and I'll say it again, no spoilers. Do not give anything away, because that's just a jerk move. No spoilers in the comments. If you post spoilers, we'll delete the comment, we'll boot you, we'll block you, we'll come to your house, and we'll punch you in the face at a safe social distance. Maybe not the last one. I am presuming in this class, Initiation for Non-Initiates, that I am addressing people who are, A, interested in the topic of initiation. If you're interested in the topic of initiation, this is probably a good class for you. If you have no interest in ever being initiated into anything ever, if you're not a joiner, if you think that this is all crazy, BS, whatever, you can go. This is not for you. This is for people who are actually interested. And B, skeptical. I am okay if you're skeptical. Skeptical is great. If you've already made up your mind, you can go. If you're like, no, I'm curious about this, well, then this class may shed some light on it, may be informative, may give you some things to think about. Much of this presentation will focus on the relative merits of a program of initiation. That's to say, I think initiation's awesome. I'm going to talk about the things that make it awesome without giving any spoilers. I will also be discussing some of the possible pitfalls. Again, in that case, I'll give spoilers. There are certain things that are just not a good idea. Hazing comes to mind. Not a good idea. We will begin by framing initiation within a context of mythology and religious discipline, both useful when properly understood. Okay, before we get to that part, a little bit about who I am. Hi, I'm John Sewell. I said that a minute ago. I am an initiator. I am a past master of a Masonic lodge. I have been involved with Wiccan and pagan circles for 20 plus years. I know a thing or two about initiation from an experiential point of view, which again, not necessarily make me qualified to teach a class like this, other than I literally walked the walk for a long time. I also love reading about it. I love studying about it. I love teaching about it. I love experiencing it from the point of view of an initiator. So all of these things do make me a little qualified to talk about it. Again, this class will not contain secrets, clues, examples from any of the traditions that I've been involved in, really from anything, unless I'm citing a bad example from film or television or, stories from the newspaper. Again, hazing comes to mind. If you are looking for those types of hints and clues and secrets and whatnot, I am not here to help you find them, because you don't need those. In fact, they will ruin the experience for you. So just no, don't do that. Again, the comments section is open for questions and comments during the video. And those questions and comments will be addressed 1 week from today. there will be an open Q&A session. So I'm recording this video in advance. You watch the video, and either in real time or as you think about it, post some questions, and a week from now, I'll get back on here, and in real time, we'll answer those questions. And this is a good thing because it also gives me the opportunity while this video is running to monitor the comments, and if anybody posts spoilers, I can delete the spoiler and block that person instantaneously. So if you're out there to troll, it's going to be a short troll. Maybe take a stroll somewhere else on the internet. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in this class is mythology. In order to understand initiation, we must first understand the role of symbol and myth in the human experience. Now we can talk about facts, which are events in space-time, and truth in terms of, a thing has truthiness to it. My favorite example of this is the tortoise and the hare, because we all heard this fable as children, about the hare who runs about and does all kinds of things, and then the tortoise who just slowly goes toward the finish line. But at the end, the tortoise wins because slow and steady wins the race. Now, I will point out that there's probably a medium speed that would have kicked both of their butts if they just had a little determination, but that's not actually the point of the story. The point of the story is that it communicates a truism, but not a fact, because there was no race between a tortoise and a hare. This is not a thing that occurred ever. It is a truth, not a fact. I'm using these terms within this context. So if I bring up truth, and I'm talking about truthiness, I am not necessarily talking about facts, and you need to be able to make that distinction. Myth is useful to explain nature and to point out a mystery. So, in an ancient time, basically, as the sun was rising in various signs of the zodiac, it would communicate to people when to plant and when to harvest, how these things worked out in terms of the entire agricultural cycle. It was the wheel in the sky that literally told them where they were at and what they needed to be doing. And the idea that these somehow told the future was, in a sense true. It's a giant sky clock, but it was communicating something about a natural occurrence that in and of itself contains a mystery, which is to say, didn't necessarily understand how or why things grow. Don't necessarily understand, the entire procreative process for lambs and sheep, but do understand that they happen in a cyclical yearly pattern. So there was both the useful mechanical understanding of it and the mystery underneath. It creates, when you create a myth around it, and that was where I'm getting to, is this truthiness and creating this myth around the truth, that makes it accessible to human consciousness. It becomes approachable. It becomes intimate. It becomes an inspiration for art and poetry. The sense of the unknown that is captured within these stories becomes an inspirational aspect for the way that human beings relate with their reality. And it can make you feel more of a connection with your reality, more of a psychological and emotional connection with your reality. And that's part of the goal here. See, myth is the repository for titanic human emotions. And for me to put that in a way that's going to contextualize and make some sense, we have images of hunger from a variety of cultures that looks like a skeletal figure. We all know what hunger feels like. It is a thing that we experience from infancy. And this idea of creating a mythological representation of it captures the emotional immediacy of the feeling into an external image and shares that idea cross-culturally. So it becomes something of a representation of something that's going on at a deeper level, a deeper truth within our lives. Our relationship with these circumstances creates a space that is conscious or unconscious that the myth holds in our psyche. So the symbol itself takes on the characteristics that are associated with it. Then there comes a point where we see the symbol and it awakens that feeling. And again, this is a useful tool in art, in creativity, in understanding ourselves and understanding our culture, in communicating. It is exceptionally valuable. Through this process, we invent the symbols that we desire to understand. We basically, it is a coping mechanism that makes these mysteries relatable and gives us a sense of connection with our environment. We imbue them with characteristics that we can relate to. We animize them. We humanize them. We develop a relationship with the symbol. And we do that in order to improve our ability to relate with and cope with the vicissitudes of life and the world. If you look at the myth of Demeter and the Kore, you can see that sort of agricultural planting and harvesting that is built into that story in terms of Persephone spending half the year in the underworld and nothing grows, and then she rises, and then Demeter allows the world to grow for half a year, and then Persephone's gone and everything dies for half a year. And that's the sort of surface level mystery associated with that. But it's also about marriage. It's also about an unequal partnership that becomes more of an equal partnership. It's also about growth, transformation, maturation. It talks about the cultural relationships that were going on at that time in Greece and explains them in a different context. It's a mystery that was taught to young people as they were growing up about how you should and shouldn't treat a partner. All of these things are incorporated into that myth. They all have cultural elements that are basically informing that. That brings us to, the big questions in terms of our myths. Who invented heaven? Who got the idea for an afterlife? Was it a lover who lost a partner, a friend, a parent? This idea that we create what we need in order to cope is central to the human experience. And so this myth-making faculty, this ability to develop a mythology in order to relate with our reality, is a survival skill that is best cultivated and understood in the context of its importance to our day-to-day lives. And all this is to say that myth isn't just a story about why the moon waxes and wanes, or where a specific mountain comes from, or the nature of the tides. The symbols in myth provide a context for our emotional relationship with the world. Now, again, the symbols that we use for myth are very similar to the symbols that show up in dreams, which is to say that when the unconscious mind selects a symbol for a dream, it tends, and this is Jungian, it tends to select the image that meets the most criteria, which is to say, if it can choose a horse or it can choose a goat, and there are 3 things going on in your life that the horse would symbolize, but there are 7 things that the goat would symbolize, your brain's going to go to the goat. The symbol is going to be selected based not just on what it means, but on how much it can mean. And the more relevance that it has, the more likely that's the symbol that's going to be used. Enduring myths have this same faculty. They have this sort of utilitarian, it doesn't just mean that. It's not just a single story. It's not one facet of this gem is all that's important. Every facet matters. The context of the culture matters. All the things that are going on in relationship to that are going to shape what symbols used in the various myth. So again, I go to anyone who says just mythology, in sarcastic quotes, is ignorant of the role stories play in shaping their experiential reality. And I'll go a little further with that for a second. Everyone tells themselves stories. They tell themselves stories about their family, that they love their family or that their family gets on their nerves. They have a story about who their family is and where their family comes from that may have no basis in fact. You know, you may not be related to the people you think of as your family. You don't know. All you know is the story that you've told yourself. What about your friends? You may have told yourself the story that your friends are smart. You know, I remember being a kid and being asked, well, if all your friends jump off of a bridge, would you? And I thought, well, yeah, my friends are pretty smart. There's probably a train coming. I'd jump off the bridge. You may not have smart friends. They jumped off the bridge, you'd be like, you know what? My friends aren't that smart. Might not do that. But both of those are based on the story you're telling yourself. There's our neighbors. We can tell ourselves all kinds of stories about our neighbors. They're good, they're bad, they recycle, they don't recycle, but we don't know what they're doing when we're not watching. We only know the narrative we create. And I guess that's my point. These stories ascribe motivation and character attributes and may not be factual, but they become our truth. They shape our relationships with individuals, whether or not they're accurate. Now, extrapolate that to our entire universe. The symbol set of mythology is the shorthand that we use to relate with the universe in which we live. Therefore, super useful tool. Also, really terrible thing to conflate with fact. This transitions nicely into religion. Religion is the container for our mythology and our cultural norms. I would like to take a moment to note the distinction between religion and delusion. I'm going to talk for a second about the cult of the Easter Bunny. So, the Easter Bunny, we understand, is representational of fertility. It is representational of, again, spring, birth, growth, all of these things. If I were a person who wanted to start a family, I could set up some sort of an altar in my home with a porcelain bunny there. And I could surround it with little candles shaped like eggs. And my partner and I could track my partner's fertility cycle, and we could engage in coitus at the most opportune times while lighting those candles, create a sense of spirituality and intensity to that relationship. And that, to me, is a really useful use of the religious concept. I'm taking the myth, I am encapsulating it in a symbol set, I'm engaging in an activity that employs that symbol set, which in turn makes it more enjoyable. People like repetition and pattern and ritual. It is a thing that we find satisfying. It removes some sense of the pressure from that and makes it a joyous spiritual experience. If, on the other hand, I have a relationship with that porcelain bunny that makes me think that I can't do that thing if I don't touch the porcelain bunny, if I don't rub the porcelain bunny just the right way, if I don't talk to the porcelain bunny for 6 hours, I turn the porcelain bunny into the fetish. Rather than have a relationship with the spirit that it represents, rather than have a relationship with the symbol, I'm literally having a relationship with the piece of porcelain. Not a good plan. Then there's the whole other delusional area, where rather than turning the porcelain bunny into the fetish, I am out at 5 o'clock in the morning, Easter morning, with traps everywhere, trying to catch the physical bunny because the Easter bunny is real. And we need to capture this bunny. What if I don't want to have children? What if I need to talk to him directly in order to have children? What if he leaves children? What if they're inside the eggs? Oh my God, we've got to do something about these eggs. What if? It's a symbol. So, again, religion is a realm wherein you can fall into the delusional. One direction or the other. It is a very fine path that's healthy. And that's the path we're talking about when we're talking about this process. So from my silly example, repetition of religious observation reinforces cultural norms, dietary restrictions or sexual restrictions. It is a form of devotion or discipline that strengthens the relationship to the mythological symbol. So again, if you're going to use this bunny metaphor, maybe you think eating eggs is really holy to the bunny, and so that's what you're going to do. That's fine, because you're doing it with a sense of devotion. If you're allergic to eggs and they make you super sick, don't do that. That's bad. Now, religion itself is shaped by the culture wherein it developed. And this is a thing that I heard years ago, but I like to share it because I think that it's really useful, is religions are like vases, and they are vessels for holding this spiritual energy. And that spiritual energy, in my opinion, is that archetypal titanic force that lives inside of us that is unrealized potential that we're trying to tap into. But the religion itself, as I said, is shaped by the cultural norms. Some are big, and some are small, and some are complex and ornate, and some are simple, and they're all good because they're all vessels for capturing that water of spirit. The problem is that then there are also that group of people who want to put a lid on that jar and say, this is the ocean. This is all the spiritual water there is, and all that out there doesn't count. And that's wrong. Again, don't fall into that trap. We are actually capable of picking and choosing where and when we want to engage in this practice to our own best self-interest. So do that. This is the way that religious practice engages us emotionally. And this emotional engagement is central to initiation. I'd like to point out that forced adherence to cultural norms creates a negative relationship to religious practice, but can still be employed in an initiatory context, albeit to reinforce the cult-like aspects of the group. For example, placing sexual limitations on someone who doesn't want to adhere to them, but somehow, in order to fit in with the cultural norms of the group, is going to accept those. They are not doing something that is healthy for themselves, but they are following the mores of the group. And basically, as I said, that creates a negative relationship, because at that point, you then start to resent and hate the group. If the religious observation is undertaken with a sense of true devotion, it can move the practitioner beyond the cultural discipline into a liminal space. And liminal space is important because that's where we're talking about the transformative process. This is the third thing we're looking at. Initiation means to begin. Basically, it is the beginning of a thing. I have initiated this process. Now, liminal space, as I'm using it here, is from the book Archetypes of Initiation by Robert Moore. I highly recommend this book. Basically, liminal means transitional. It is the place where we move from one field of experience to another. As an example, a wedding is in its essence a liminal space. You walk in as two individuals, you walk out as a couple that has been recognized by the community. A graduation is similar. You walk in as the undergraduate, you walk out as the graduate. There is a ritual space that takes place in between. Baptism, also true for some entheogenic or psychedelic experiences, but those are not initiatory in the sense that they may not meet all the criteria of an initiation. They can, on the other hand, affect the way in which we view and relate with the world. Now, speaking of what I spoke to a moment ago in terms of forced adherence, if you imagine that you're at your wedding and you get cold feet and you don't want to go through with it, that forced adherence, if there were somebody there putting that gun to your head saying, no, you're getting married today, you're probably not in a good place to come out of that ritual with a sense of love and devotion to your partner, but rather you're going to come out of that ritual with a sense of, oh God, how do I get out of here? Now, what these events that I listed above have in common is a space outside of the normal framework of life. what we were calling the liminal space, and they represent the transition in a sort of before-after sense. The liminality is the transition, and it's basically from one thing to the other. Initiation is the beginning of a process, and liminal space is where that initiation happens. I should point out that when you take your second or third initiation, that doesn't mean that the other thing stops being a liminal space, that you only get to have one. There are many transitions in our lives. You can be beginning this next phase of your work while not having completed an earlier phase, in the same way that you can get married when you're only 3/4 of the way through college. Liminal space is the ritual space where the mythological, with all its titanic mystery, and the religious practice, with its social discipline, intersect. Thus, the liminal space is where the proper attitude of religious instruction of the mysteries takes place. Duties are communicated in the form of a promise or oath. Progress is marked or acknowledged. Something may be sacrificed in terms of some sort of religious discipline. The dangers of liminal space deal with the idea of improperly prepared guide, or absence of guide, or improperly prepared candidate. And this brings me to an important point. When do you stop an initiation? And the answer is always. If there's a sense of panic, if you're in that about to get married and you suddenly realize that this is not the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, you know what you do is you don't go through with that. That's a bad plan. If there's a violation, that person's got a gun to your head and says, you got to do this. Don't do that. It's a bad plan, or do it and run away screaming later. If there's a manipulation, if you don't do this, I'm going to cut you out of my will. Well, again, no, that is not a healthy space for this process to work. Any legitimate initiatory process can be halted at any time. If you are going through an initiation and the initiator, the person who's running the scene, says to you, I need you to do this thing, and you in your heart are like, I can't do that, that's the moment you stop. Stop right there. Just stop. It's okay. Any legitimate initiatory process stops when you say stop. If it doesn't, if you can't have the autonomy and the sense of self to control the space that you're in a cult. And again, run away. That's important. Before moving on from the idea of liminal space, I am going to talk about false initiation a little bit. That sort of trapped in the liminal space thing that can happen. The first pitfall is ego death. This idea that once I've gone through this initiation, I have destroyed and transcended my ego and all things of this earth, and I can stop taking my medication that keeps me alive because now I'm miraculously healed. Don't do that. Don't. It's not a good plan. As it turns out, this is a profound, moving, transformative, emotional process. It is not going to make you a better or more powerful person. You got to do that yourself. If you want to be a great, evolved, magnificent human being, you literally have to do the groundwork. This is a way to do the groundwork, certainly, but it doesn't do it for you. You don't walk out in this magical space and everything is perfect for the rest of your life. That's not how this works. There is that religious delusion where you confuse the mythological with the historical, and you get into that space where you're like, I am the embodiment of all the great gods of all time. And it's like, no, you are an embodiment of a profound spiritual reality, certainly, and everything is connected to everything else. But that doesn't make you the arbiter of all things in reality. there's a little story about this that I love. It's a joke about an elephant. So a wise man was instructing his pupil on how God was connected to and within everything. And he says, I need you to meditate to attain this yoga where you see no distinction between yourself and the divine. And so for 3 days, the student sat and meditated on the nature of God until he had a moment of awakening, and he saw himself as an aspect of God and the dust as the aspect of God. And his master was an aspect of God. And all of he was within this dark hut, and he opened the flap on the hut and he walked out into the marketplace. And it was just colors and food vendors and dancers, and they were all these amazing, these fractals of the divine. And it was just this incredible experience. And he was wandering down the street in a state of ecstasy, and coming up the street was an elephant, and he was looking at this elephant like a Ganesha-like, and he's just, that elephant is God, and I am God. And the man on the back of the elephant's going, get out of the way. He's like, I am God. And the elephant, God would not hurt God. And he stood there, and the elephant came and just picked him up with the trunk and slammed him against the wall and moved on. And the master came out and stood over his student, who was laying in the dust, sort of little blood trickling out of his lip, and says to him, so what did we learn? And the student says, Master, I was God, and the elephant was God. God would not hurt God. So either I am not God or the elephant is not God. And the master looked at his student and said, didn't you hear God up there telling you to get out of the way? Pause for laugh. Yeah, so don't get delusional. Don't get stuck in the liminal space. This brings us to our third sort of, wow, let's worry about false initiation thing, dangerous obsessions. If you are obsessed with having power over other people, go into politics. If you love money and wealth, oh my God, get a degree in economics. If you want to control your fellow man, then get into some sort of dom-sub relationship that's consensual, okay? Because initiation is not the place to fill an aching void inside of you. It is a next step once you've already gotten all that shit worked out. So don't expect it to make you a better person. You got to be a decent person to start with. If you feel like you've got to get some shit together before you go through an initiatory process, good on you. Do that. I totally support you getting your shit together before you start. All right, so let's talk about the nuts and bolts of an initiation. Things that it requires. A, an initiator. Now, in the case of self-initiation, and I know some people practice this, you would be the initiator and the candidate. That said, the initiator is also the person who communicates the mystery and who basically is in charge of monitoring and developing that liminal space in the safest and most efficacious way possible. And it's really hard to do that and go through the process yourself. So whenever possible, work with a competent initiator, in my opinion. You will need a space or setting. These are entirely dependent upon the nature of the mystery you're engaging in. A cave, a mountaintop, a forest, a temple. You need that place that is where the liminal space is created. And as an interesting side note, when you return to that space, it will awaken that sense of liminality, that space outside of space-time that is so glorious. So, choose that space with care because it becomes a touchstone to you. You'll need a mythology. You will need a narrative framework for this initiatory process. And that, again, is because the symbol set communicates layers and layers, and there's something underneath that. that is important to the process. You will need some sort of religious devotion, an emotional relationship to the mythology in order to deepen the context. Now, again, it needs to be some sort of devotion that you're actually interested in. If it is a devotion that goes entirely against your nature, it's not going to work. There needs to be some sort of experience or instruction related to that devotion. This could include a practical, an observance, an oath regarding future conduct within the culture and norms of the community, but there needs to be an experiential element that captures that devotional aspect and makes it a part of the transformative process. Not unlike, again, the wedding metaphor, where you literally say vows to each other. You behave differently after the vows than you do before. Again, there needs to be some central mystery, something that informs the narrative, touches the emotional to inspire the devotional, and transcend the rational. That is literally the engine on which all of the rest of this turns. It is a relationship with something that is beyond comprehension, trans-rational, and you create an image of that in order to have a relationship. It is an ideal that is beyond comprehension and therefore can only be understood through adoration. Also, and again, this is a really important aspect if you've got it, is community. Now, under self-initiation, again, you don't necessarily have the community thing. Or you are friends with a bunch of other people who've self-initiated and y'all hang out in internet chat groups. I don't know what y'all do. But the point is, having a support system of like-minded people who share in that mystery and in that context is useful in developing that sort of community cohesion. Now, if you're I've been reading a book called The Happiness Curve as an aside that's terrific because it talks about short-term and long-term happiness and how these things work. Now, short-term happiness is something that, for example, if you start making more money than your neighbors specifically, that you will be happier for the next 2 years. And then that will become the new normal, and you will return to whatever base level of happiness you had prior to that. It's called hedonic treadmill. On the other hand, if you make friends and build a community, the short term, you're just interacting with some new people. It's not really that big a thing. But 2 years later, 4 years later, 8 years later, your happiness will increase well beyond anything that money would do because you have a sense of community and connection to other people. If you want to be happy in life, have a community of like-minded people that you share things with. This is literally a key to happiness. So if you're like, well, why should I become part of an organization and initiate and meet people? Well, do you want to be happy? Because that'll help. Now, that said, all communities have people in them. Some people are bad. There will be times when it's hard. That's when the bonds of the community are really tested. You will go through that. All communities go through that. So just expect that. Walk into it with your eyes open. But as I said, in the long run, you will be a happier individual if you have a community you're connected to. All right, so again, without going into too many details, or any details really, other than to talk in the broadest sense, I want to talk about psychologically what's going to be happening in an initiatory process. So basically, the goal of the initiation is to, create that sort of liminal, solemn space, and then to put the candidate into a sense of what's called psychological arousal, which is to say it's that sort of everything is done in such a way to where you're right at the edge of your sort of fight or flight response because you are much more aware in those moments. If something is going to be communicated to you that is a mystery, that has depth and importance, putting the person into a headspace where they're extremely receptive to that matters. If you think about, again, the wedding metaphor, I love this. The entire person walking slowly up an aisle in a room full of people that are staring at them while the other person who's going through the process is standing in the front of the room just sweating. That is that state of arousal that I'm talking about. And it's intentionally created in order to give that moment weight and solemnity and intention. It's baked into the process. So this state of arousal that is creating this sense of liminal space is where the learning is most impactful. I recently traveled to Chicago, and I took an overnight flight, and I found myself sitting next to someone who's going through the seminary program to become a Roman Catholic priest. And we had a wonderful conversation about all kinds of things, you know, the culture that he experiences versus the culture that I experience. We had a great time. And one of the things that he really talked about was bells and smells. He says, you know, when I was growing up, he was raised in a much more Protestant religious background. And when he discovered Catholicism and the more high church aspects, the more traditional masses that he could attend, there was this sense of weight and of, intensity that was created by the lights being lower and the sun coming through the stained glass at an angle and the smell of the incense and the smoke and the chanting. And that put him into a headspace that made him feel more spiritual. Now, I should point out that, I mean, really trying to engage emotionally is part of this process. And so anything that takes you into that more emotional space is right for the process to a point. If you cross over from this is super intense and moving to, oh God, we're all going to die, you've gone too far. I will talk about, for just a second, there's a book called Brain Rules by John Medina, and he talks about learning and sensory experience and the different senses and how they activate different parts of the brain and how they work in combination to make learning more effective and more intense. And this is part of how our brains work, is integrating various pieces of sensory information in a close context. And reading and understanding that, if you are a person who performs initiations, is really useful in how you can implement some of that into your initiatory practice. And as a person going through initiation, you can sit there and analytically go, oh, that's what they're doing now. And that'll make you feel really superior. No, don't do that. Actually enjoy the process instead. I will say that in a state where there's not enough arousal, when that psychological arousal is not achieved, the initiation is not going to work well. So for example, if you read ahead and you know everything that's going to happen and you have all the spoilers, it's not going to have the impact. Or if you're just one of those people who you find everything dull and boring in life, well, sorry, sucks to be you. It's not going to have the impact. And again, if there's too much, if that person just flips right into that fight or flight part of the brain where they're just ready to run out of the room screaming, or they go flat affect and they're just frozen, they're going to get nothing out of it. So a skilled initiator can adjust the pacing and delivery to accommodate the candidate, which brings us to having a good initiator really matters when going through this type of process. Now, again, if we're going back to our imaginary couple getting married, if the priest sees that the groom looks like he's about to faint, he's shaking all over, and he may, in fact, pass out at any moment, he will probably slow down, lean in a little, speak a little more softly, check in with the guy and make sure that he's all right before he moves on with the ceremony. Because somebody who's got some practice and knows what they're doing and has seen this before knows how to deal with a situation like that. So again, competent initiator, really important. I should point out that there also may be moments in an initiatory process where that sort of fight or flight response is intentionally engaged. This is like that expectancy violation where I think that this is going to happen, and suddenly this happens instead. It's not a bad thing. It should be used sparingly, but it is really useful, again, to underline a point, to point to a mystery, to jar somebody out of a state of being sort of hypnotized, because that's another thing that can happen, is that in an initiatory experience, the bells and the smells and the chanting and whatever may be going on are going to trance you out. And waking that up is going to be super useful. So maybe baked into the process, doesn't mean it's not working, doesn't mean it's bad, just again, should be used sparingly. It is an excellent method for introducing the mystery element during that state of psychological arousal, is to attach it to something super intense. This whole psychological arousal, expectancy violation thing brings us to consent and hazing. When you should leave an initiation. Always leave the initiation. If you are having a moment where you're like, I don't think I should be here, maybe don't. Now, if you're having a moment of, I'm not sure, that's okay. You can stop and think about that. But the minute that you're like, I think these people intend to kill and eat me, leave. Do that. That's just the smart move. Do the smart move. Let's talk for just a second about why hazing works and why you should avoid it. Hazing is a thing that people do in sort of that college initiatory format where they treat the new candidates like crap. Just terrible. Make them sleep in the dirt and eat worms and, do all kinds of, paddle them like you see in Animal House, whatever. Just terrible things. Not because there's any spiritual lesson there, but because they're enjoying inflicting the pain and showing just how much that person is willing to suffer to be a part of this group. In turn, that then is passed on as a tradition. So the person who was abused becomes the abuser and says, look how much I'm going to make that person suffer in order to become part of this group. It makes being a part of the group seem worth it. And psychologically, people will convince themselves that being a part of the group is worth what they went through simply because they put up with so much and they don't want to admit they were wrong. So, hazing, bad, psychologically unhealthy, really lets loose a whole Pandora's box worth of gross things. Don't do that. If you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't think this is initiation, I think these people are just fucking with me, leave. Find somebody who's serious and who's doing the work in a serious manner that's useful. Like I said, it's a fine path. And if you get off the path, you're out lost in the wilderness, and we want to avoid that. An interesting example of this is an article I read about studies that were done with orangutans. And what they would do is there was a platform, and they would put banana on the platform. And then an orangutan would go up and get the banana, and they would pull out these fire hoses and spray the orangutan, knock them off the platform, and spray all the other orangutans. Which, by the way, this is a horrible, horrible practice. But this is what they did, because psychology students are like people in fraternities, and they'll just haze the shit out of orangutans. The point is, they continued this practice until all the orangutans realized that if they went and tried to grab that banana, that they would all get sprayed with the hose. So then they introduced a new orangutan. And when it went to go up the ladder, all the other orangutans pulled it down, beat it up, would not let it go get that banana. And this continued. The next orangutan, they introduced another new one. And again, before it could make it up the ladder, everybody pulled it down, kicked its ass, would not let it go up the ladder. This went on until they had replaced all the orangutans. All the original ones who were sprayed with the hose, gone. But you introduce a new guy there, and everybody in the room is going to kick his ass before they let him go up that ladder and get that banana. Because, oh my God, we don't know. None of us has experienced what will happen other than we know we should kick your ass before we let you do it. This is the kind of thing that shitty hazing leads to. So I guess we're getting to the closing part of this now. I just want to wrap up by saying true initiation creates a shared experience and increased understanding. It inculcates a code of conduct and cultural expectation within the community that should resonate with the candidate. And the goal of a healthy initiation process is to foster the devotion required to make the growth of the individual and the observance of the cultural expectations emotionally fulfilling rather than prescribed or literally against one's better nature. If the central lesson of the initiation is fear, subservience, humiliation, degradation, or devotion to a charismatic leader or group, run away. Love is the law. Love under will.